All right, gentlemen. Well, it's another episode of Misfit Social podcast. And while we're
hard thinking
about
on hard issues.
So this is going to be about your marriage?
Yeah. This is marriage counseling.
Let's go.
Yeah.
I don't know if we got enough memory on the cameras for that.
Or child rearing.
Yeah. I don't know if we can get hard enough thinking to match the hardness of that issue.
I didn't know where you were going with that when you said you know if we could get hard enough.
I don't know if we can get hard enough.
Here we go.
Hard enough thinking.
Here we go.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we'll change subjects before we get too far in the gutter. So during this political season, we're going to talk today about the concept of Christian nationalism.
Ew.
Not a new thought.
Not a new thought.
No.
When you say that, like...
Well, historically, it's been done.
Okay.
I mean, not just, not just like goals,
Yeah.
We were talking about it in the last episode about the fact that Germany and the Lutheran Church were, one. Paid your tithe tax to the...
Yeah.
Let's get a working definition of Christian nationalism.
Okay.
What would we describe? How would we describe that, just in general? What Christian nationalism?
My assumption would be that the primary leaders are Christian, have a Christian ethic, and that dominates all other stripes within a certain nation.
You said it's happened before. I mean, clearly the Roman Catholic
Yep.
construct was definitely a Christian nationalist type thing.
Only at 300, after 300 AD. You're right. I just want to throw it in there that the earliest couple of centuries were different.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the most horrible stories of the Christian faith come from those years.
And that was under Constantine?
Yeah, it was Emperor Constantine.
Yeah.
His conversion led to, and you got to imagine the beleaguered Christians had been persecuted for 2 centuries. So are honestly sick of it, right? So, hey, we want you on our team. I mean, it's super appealing, but I think Christianity, in my opinion, has been trying to shake the addiction to empire ever since in its various forms. It's just so appealing. Power.
Church of England.
Yeah. Power.
Also would have been an example of.
And they broke from the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah.
And that was what was her
Henry VIII.
Was it Henry VIII?
If I'm not mistaken, Henry VIII over the whole divorcing and wives being executed.
Yeah, that was a step too far, and he was like, "Well, I'll just make my own religion.
Yeah, I'll make my own church,
right?
Which is Catholicism with the divorce. It's definitely changed a bit over time.
Yeah.
I think early on it was pretty much that.
So do you think there's a historical narrative if we go out on the streets of Chicago or Nashville, Houston, and say, hey, did the Roman Catholic Empire, not the Roman Catholic Church, but the Roman Catholic Empire, was that a success? What do you think the average person would say, or could they even articulate it?
That's a good question. And for me, I think anyone, I don't want this to come off wrong, but anyone who thinks deeply would want to define, what do you mean by success? And I know that kind of makes it murky for your question, but what is success? First, numbers,
quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Totalitarian governments by certain metrics could be considered a success, but not in regards to liberty, freedom, human flourishing.
All right, so you mentioned defining success, but also defining what is Christian nationalism. So what is that to you? Like, or do you have a quote? The success part
or the Christian nationalism?
Just the Christian nationalism.
Man, I've been really thinking about that. It's wedding Christianity as a misunderstanding, first of all, about what the objectives of Christianity truly are from its founder. Okay. To a political party, to an empire, a lot of it's done from a misconstruing of trying to help. I'll go with, this is a broad definition.
Yeah, because I do think it is not nefarious. I mean, the
no,
people
it's
that
not always
pursue
malicious.
It, I mean,
it's a misunderstanding of power.
Right.
That's what I would say it's a Christian's misunderstanding of power. And in a previous episode, we talked about soul power, under, in a separate talk. When we don't trust power under, we are susceptible to power over. And so I would say it is Christians misunderstanding that power over, domination, even coercion, earthly definitions of power as a way of expressing the faith.
Okay. So then does that turn Christianity in general into a political party?
Yeah, it changes it.
If there is I'm not saying that there is, but if there is a true Christian nationalist movement, that's almost like a political party.
That's a political party.
I mean, and would some say that the opposite of that is just like leave your hands off of it, and it is what it is. I don't have anything to do with that. And, just absolve yourself totally of responsibility for your nation, and say, well, that's not the Christian mission. Is that?
Well, I think it's interesting that when Jesus himself came onto the scene, he landed into a political climate in the Hebrew nation, the land of Israel, where there were 4 major ideologies around how to deal with power. So what you just said would be the Essenes. They were like, screw it. We're going to the desert to pray and fast and we're forsaking for society. It's not worth it. Well, Jesus doesn't espouse that. Then you have...
So is that, let's put each one of these on... let's modernize them as you're describing them.
Yeah.
So the Essenes they're like today's off the grid people.
Yeah, maybe like some type of fresh monastic approach to let's cloister away and pursue God and each other.
So there is a spiritual aspect to it, not just going off grid.
Yeah, no, the Essenes are doing it to pursue faith, and some of the Essenes could be some of the early roots of monastic movements where your monks... but they just
living
forsake society.
Okay.
They don't feel that they have anything to. There's no place for them.
It's a bit like what the
in.
Amish have done.
Yeah.
In modern society.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Then you would have the Zealots, which are ultra nationalistic terrorists.
Okay.
And they believe that the only way that things get back to the way they are is because we make it that way. And by make it with violent, whatever's necessary, make
force.
it happen.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, just because we're going to talk this, I would just throw in the little tidbit, the tease that we'll get back to. Their favorite target in the time of Jesus were tax collectors, which the Romans would employ your fellow countrymen to work for them. And so they would have to reach a certain tax threshold, a certain number that the Romans demanded they get. Anything extra they'd put in their pockets. So they were looked at as traitors. And so the Zealots would target them as a sign of terror.
Gotcha.
This is what's wrong with our country, you traitors.
Okay, so they even had a targeted segment of society that they were going after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And just force.
All right.
Willpower, it's in our power to make this happen.
So we had off the grid kind of spiritual people. You have your terrorists. What about who are the next two?
And then you have the evangelicals. I'm sorry. You have the Pharisees.
You didn't do that on purpose.
That slipped out. I totally slipped out.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
So
I don't
evangelical / Pharisees.
Yeah, you have the Pharisees, which their philosophy was, how could God help us when we're unrighteous? We need to be righteous, and God will help us. And it's not all as awful as that could sound, but it often played out that awful, meaning they're earning and meriting God's activity in the world by their righteousness. But it did start from, if we're sinful and filthy and we're not identified with God in any way whatsoever, we kind of are getting what we're sowing this, and so it's natural that
basically
we're
getting
crop.
what we deserve.
And somewhat they would
But
align with the Zealots, at least in the sense of their end game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so these are your ultra religious, but here's the thing that's really important because you hear Pharisee thrown around a lot. They were feeding the poor more than anyone on planet Earth at that time. They were giving and being generous and doing good things to try and move the landscape toward God.
Okay.
But it's also worth noting that they were the singular enemy of Jesus in the gospel stories.
Okay. So we have the religious people who are cloistered away.
Yeah,
You've
just
got
done with it.
You've got the terrorists who are also religious.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Pharisees who are like your kind of modern day church attender type, pretty serious about things. And then the fourth one?
Sadducees.
Okay.
And they were religious, but they had fully succumbed and aligned with political power.
Okay.
They would be almost an extension of the government itself.
Okay.
And they weren't, the Pharisees believed in supernatural, Sadducees didn't believe in supernatural. One way is Pharisees would say, well, how can God help us when we're not even pursuing God? The Sadducees would say, how can we fight against Rome? They're too powerful. We need to join them and work with them and cooperate with them.
Okay.
And those are the four things that Jesus lands in, and he is none of them.
Okay.
Now that's what's profound.
So when we're defining Christian nationalism, what it sounds like to me is actually we have all four of those things still today.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And the guy, the Christ, who is should be the leader of the Christian nationalist, is actually nowhere to be found.
Yeah. He's a mascot of that ideology.
Okay.
He will come out at halftime to justify it, but the real score is power.
Okay.
And control.
All right. So the leader, the thing that is leading that movement is the desire and the lust for power. And
to keep the familiar.
Yeah.
Especially in a country like the U.S., right? Yeah. Go ahead.
And then Jesus is kind of the mascot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lordship, because if he is the lordship, I think you might be working somewhere.
You're talking about the mascot of the current Christian nationalism.
Yeah, Christian nationalism in general. Yeah. They love him to come out.
I would have said that he would also have been back then. They just didn't know who he was.
Exactly.
Because they were he was to them the Messiah, but Jesus was not the Messiah. So it was always this has got to happen. This is going to be by force because the Messiah is who will ultimately be the deliverer of us.
Yep. But every one of those groups would have loved to have co-opted the Messiah.
Yes.
Because he would have substantiated and validated their claims and their approach.
Yeah, but it would have only been for a nationalistic result. Yep. That's what they wanted.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're not really that far removed from that.
No.
And Jesus, the mascot, is basically a mascot running around at the Republican Party with a white robe and a purple sash and a cross on his head, and he's throwing T-shirts to everybody.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. That says pro-life.
Absolutely.
Pro-life, pro-gun, and pro-coal.
Well, let's throw this out here.
Pro-coal.
Yeah, let's throw it out to our audience, right? Trying to get Jesus on your team is fundamentally the antithesis of lordship. You don't get the Lord on your team, you get on the Lord's team. And so what I'm trying to say is that we have these approaches to what's going to make things best, but have we checked that and evaluated it based on the so-called Lord, founder, king's disposition and mindset around what do you think of power? Yeah. Is this the way you approach power? Is this the way that this is done? And I'm always, how do we get back to the origins?
Drama that we're in, which is a real life drama for us, which side do you choose and what's a good choice for Christians in the political environment? To just be ambivalent is not an option.
Nope.
To be not proactive on some level would be irresponsible. So what's Jesus' choice?
Right.
What's Jesus' choice? If the four things, if being a zealot or being an abstentia, or, the zealot option or the right-wing Christian isn't an option, aligning with the government's not, what are you going to do?
Well, for me, I feel like the approach is, from a political perspective, is a little bit, has to be a little meeker, with a little bit more meekness as far as I'm going to have an opinion. I'm going to have things that I support. I'm going to have people that maybe I disagree with, but I want to be humble and meek about that. And I feel like for when we look at his example, he almost seemed kind of all across the board. It was tough to tell.
Well, he had a zealot on his team.
Where he
had a tax collector on his team.
That's exactly right. He had a tax collector and a zealot on his team.
Yeah.
And you never hear of their disagreement because his way overshadowed their polarity. And that's what, for believers, we really need to at least aspire to.
So like, if we drive for a third party system, which makes a lot of logical sense, in our environment, that to disrupt and have a third party, that kind of thing makes a lot of sense. But then you start thinking about it from this perspective and you think, okay, well, what are we driving at? What's the end zone here? And is that really more like Christian nationalism than it is about,
So let me ask this question then. One of the big things for a Christian nationalist movement, it's safe to say that would be pro-life.
Sure. Yeah, that would be a value.
That would be a value.
Pro-coal. No.
Pro-coal, yeah. Fossil fuels, pro-fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So the thing that I wrestle with is Roe v. Wade is a big topic for this year's coming election. I mean, Supreme Court just overturned that not too long ago. So does someone...
And it's important to say that they overturned it, but they put it back to states, which is... Yeah.
Agreed. I have a philosophical disagreement with the ideology that it was law.
Right.
Because the government had decades to codify it into law.
Yep.
And everybody was too soft to do it.
Exactly. Yep.
So it was easier.
Pitch it back.
It was easier to pitch it back to the courts. Now that gets us into a whole nother concept of Congress not doing absolutely wussing out on doing their job.
Yep.
Right. But where I feel like today, I think we are getting to the point where we are so polarized.
Yes.
That if you say you are a believer, then you have to be a red believer.
Yeah.
Like you can't be a blue believer.
No. Nope.
Well, but there are a whole set of people that are, in the sense of social justice and the whole, civil rights.
I agree. But what we're doing sometimes is we're honing in on and saying, well, you can't be on that side because of this.
Right. But the problem with that is that there's actually viable, dare I say, Christian values
in each camp
being represented on both camps. So you're splitting the faith at that point.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly toxic because the whole thing's been overlaid with the structure of empire or Christian nationalism instead of the faith itself, which would be us and not dividing.
So the kingdom of heaven is a subversive kingdom, right? It actually is subverting the political parties, and it is subverting the power and agenda of the political landscape. And so to embrace a kingdom of God is to be subversive. I mean, like I said in the last episode, you had 25,000, they say, possibly worldwide Christians in the first century that grew to 200-300 million maybe by the time Constantine rolled around. All of that growth and expansion and Christian the expansion of it all happening in an oppressive governmental system.
Yes. Because exactly, no one had political power for the 2.5 centuries where Christianity thrives and establishes itself
while being illegal.
You don't need it. You don't need it to function. And that's what I'm most concerned about. And again, my definition for Christian nationalism is kind of vague and wordy and all that. But it's fundamentally Christians believing they need political power for them to function missionally. To do, they've wedded their faith to a particular political party or a particular government's power structure in order to function and let their faith be lived out. And nothing can be further from the truth when it comes to Scripture or even history for that matter. And every time the church or Christians have done this, it does not end well. Like they are distorted, perverted. And Lord of the Rings, man, if anyone's out there that's a Tolkien fan, he's touching on this in so many ways, is the allure of power is at the heart, is how humans, and when he looks at men, they had 9 rings. They're so susceptible to this ambition of what power will do. They trust it to save them. And to my brothers and sisters out there, I would just caution, prayerfully examine, do you believe that power is going to save the faith?
Well,
That's getting thrown around in some of these political debates as if I even heard someone recently say, Christianity is going to be shut down if we don't get this election right. And I'm like, what? You think Christian? Like, we're not.
No, it's like throwing gas on the fire.
You're going to throw gas on the fire, and I don't want it. I don't want someone to come after us to shut us down. But if they did, it's probably going to make it grow even faster.
Look at Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you mentioned as a misfit, and now the end game of Christian nationalism plays out in Germany, and it's an ugly thing. Yeah, and then you got a guy who essentially lives the life of a prophet, speaking out against it. And look what he had to do to be a Christian now in a Christian nationalist nation. Yeah, that was doing overtly evil things.
Yeah, I mean, because you could say that the Nazi Party was definitely a Christian nationalist movement, right?
Well, it sprung out of that construct, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's danger in that because
he owned the Catholic Church. You know what I mean? They oppressed the Catholic Church because they were one and the same.
Yeah. What were you saying, Cliff?
But they also, I don't remember if it was the Lutheran Church but they were giving dictates to what could be said, what couldn't be said, and that's very, very concerning, given some of the rhetorics that we hear today about censorship and cancel culture and things of that nature.
Well, I want to circle back around to a question you had a minute ago, and your answer was so good about an approach to meekness again. How would Jesus handle something? Now watch this, everybody. I beg you, search your scriptures, argue, see if I ain't right. Because he did it. Jesus would die for his enemies. That's how he leads. And that's how he calls us to lead. And we keep trying to make that some kind of fantasy fairy tale that's maybe a Jesus level thing, but it sure ain't something I can do. When actually we're called to grow into the kind of people who surrender sometimes to things that are not what we would like, right? Yeah. But we do it in an act of love and an act of subversion to change hearts. It's not manipulative. It's love. It's service. It's washing feet. It's this kind of caring and loving for each other well that is actually the most powerful power in the universe. So love is the most powerful power in the universe.
Not saying, John the Baptist's approach is better than Jesus, but you do see examples where he's like, hey, Herod, by the way, what you did with your wife there, was...
But that didn't work out so well for him.
No, I know, he was beheaded.
But Jesus spoke truth to power. There's no doubt that he did. Yeah. But he also was willing. I think what's happened with Christian nationalism is we're ready to kill for our belief, but Jesus called us to die for the belief. There's a big difference. There's a big difference. Christian nationalism, because if you look at the history, right, Christians loved their enemies for 2.5 centuries. And when empire validated them and said, hey, you can be the state religion, within 70 years, Christians are conscripted into the army and they're killing for their faith instead of dying for it. And that shift, now let's just make it metaphorical. Don't even have to be literal. But am I not willing to surrender my sense of control for a deeper, more pervasive and influential act of love instead of dominance, which would be killing for what I believe? Dying and surrendering for what I believe is a much more, and that's the foundation of the kingdom of God.
So in theory, let's say we all give a nod to that and go, okay, so now what, right? Yeah. So what's the proactive step that you take to care about your nation, to care about righteousness and care about good things, right? And advocacy for the right kinds of things, how to go about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, at least in the Old Testament model, you see a influence in high places, right? maybe not the top seat, but somebody who's in the ear of someone who has power.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, could we say we've mentioned Martin Luther King as a misfit? I feel like he's an example
Beautiful example.
of how he would use his voice, willing to be arrested,
Put himself at risk.
Voice crying in the wilderness.
put
Yeah.
himself at risk,
Yep.
did not promote violence in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Even when tremendous, heinous acts of violence
Yeah.
were committed against him and his team members and everybody that was, rallying around him.
Yeah.
I think he is a modern example
Sure.
Yes.
of yes,
Influence.
be strong in your faith. I don't find him wavering in his faith, but I also don't find him when he's giving his "I have a dream" speech that we would be a Christian nationalist, where it's just one. It's more. Let's open the doors. Let's give opportunity to everybody.
Yep.
Not take it away.
So what's the difference between, say, that and somebody taking a job as a lobbyist or taking a role in the government where they're a decamp to somebody's, primary role?
So I want to echo those Hebrew scriptures, right? In all of those stories, they're positioned by God. They're not pursuing it. And there's that could sound really cool on the surface, but it's Ring of Power stuff again. Frodo, and this is what Tolkien...
Is he a candidate? Oh,
yes, I would vote Frodo. I'm Team Frodo all the way. Tolkien, though, is really in this fantasy is telling so much about power that he has such a heart for hobbits, smaller people who live simple.
Why are you looking at me when you say
I
that?
did not. I was looking over here
You
at the
looked
floor.
at me
I
dead
did
in
not.
my eyes.
I was not.
You said
Everyone, it's
Frodo
not
has
true.
passion for hobbits, and you
And
looked right at
smaller
me
people.
and said smaller people.
It's rude, man. I think it was Freudian, though. I
Yeah.
don't think it was really purposeful.
Yeah, it
They
was-
just wanted good food and family. I mean,
Are
I'm
you
not
just you're
touching
just
it.
trying to jump right back into it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
They just want
Yeah,
good
continue.
food. They want family. That there is a commitment to contentment that is it helps with an immunity to the allure of power, which over time will take you off course. And so he says, Frodo, and these are the kind of people that
Is this in the Bible? Where is this?
Well, yeah, the whole
It's what it-
principle's there. Yeah. What I'm getting at is people who get to the ears of
lost
kings are appointed.
Yeah.
And God appoints David, King David, the one after God's own heart, is not looking for that. He's picked. And what I'm trying to get is that you see in the meta-narrative of Scripture is that power, earthly power, is a burden. But I think too many believers don't realize that. They see it as privilege. And they're after it, but it's a burden. So if you see power as a burden, then you bear it well when that falls upon you. And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying you can't bear that, but the best leaders are the ones who aren't looking for it, but they're willing to serve if it's thrust upon them to do it. And that's the danger of Christian nationalism. What I'm hearing coming from a segment of people who claim to follow Jesus is give us power so we can turn this thing around. And
Yeah, I mean,
that's dangerous.
Yeah, it's a little bit of sounds salvational for present, for
That's a good point.
present day.
Yeah.
And I don't
Unpack
think
that salvation. I know you're going to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything, if somebody wants to be a lobbyist or be a politician in general,
Sure.
and they're a believer, I think that's awesome. I don't think we're advocating, I'm certainly not advocating don't be involved. What I'm saying is the salvation is that whatever fear I have or whatever I don't like about my situation. So what we hear being tossed about today is that one of the two candidates is going to cause us to lose our democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So the opposite candidate would then be saving our democracy. And what I don't like is when that gets too tied to the evangelical movement.
Yep.
Now you're in this us and them.
Yeah.
So if you're in the LGBTQ community, if you're in a social justice community, if you're in the pro-choice community, now all of a sudden you're like, well, can I align myself with that? or am I an outsider? And I think that's where the division comes in. And I don't see Jesus trying to make people outsiders.
No, there isn't.
So that's the divisiveness that I don't like. I'm not saying you can't, be political, that you can't support somebody, but when we are drawing it to the larger organization of organized religion, that doesn't work for me at all.
And I think that, back to somebody being able to serve inside of the political system, I think there can be some passion inside of somebody. They have a grace for something that others don't, right? Because you have to have a certain grace for the political process, because it's maddeningly,
Sure,
just terribly hierarchical and all of this power structures and stuff. So you'd have to have some kind of grace for that. And I think what has to drive people, though, is what is their messaging, right? It's not just the position they're hunting after, but they're driving at some change. And so if I come from a broken place in my life, I tend to have mercy toward people that come from that place, and I want to give back. I want to lift them up. I want to help them not have my struggle. So you have a message. And I think this is where Jesus, John the Baptist, and others came to prominence. The Apostle Paul, their messaging put them in a place of where their voice, people pushed them into a place to be heard, right?
Yeah.
And they weren't afraid of it. They sought it. Paul wanted to stand before Agrippa, and he wanted to go to Rome.
Yeah.
He wanted to talk to the Sanhedrin. He was willing to pay a price for it, right? He had a grace for it. So I think there can be people that are proactive inside of the political systems for the messaging that is a kingdom messaging.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing.
Right. No, I think that's so true. And I think people go into these places, like say politics, right? There are believers who, they're good politicians, they lead well. A heart to serve can find an enormous array of ways to go about doing that. I think for me, it's a little meta in the sense that when whole swaths of people are being coerced with fear, and the answer being getting the right leader. I heard a quote a couple of years ago is that we trust too much in the political process because we trust too little in God. And we keep believing that what will save us is if we get the right person this time. And on and on.
Yeah. It's too simplistic a view, really.
Yeah, that's where I'm really, but I'm all for people serving, but then I also caution, like with a ring of power, I keep coming back to it, right? To bear that, it has the capacity to change you. Yeah. The chair can change you.
It's not the cross I want to die on.
No,
you can put a lot of effort out for a little bit of return.
Yeah. So let me ask a obviously sticky or thorny question here. So, big topic of the election will be women's rights and their ability to choose.
Sure.
Is it a fair statement to say if there was a Christian nationalist movement that it would be pro-life?
Yeah, without a doubt.
So we're in agreement on that.
Yeah, it would.
All right.
And it would restrict that on such a significant level that be unrecognizable as it is now.
So when we talk about first principles and first values, I want to ask you guys a question. Are people who are pro-choice pro-life in any way?
What do you mean?
Yes.
You get what he said? You understand?
Yeah,
what he
you can
said?
ask it again.
Are there any people? Are people who are pro-choice also pro-life in any way?
Yeah, because
sure. Yeah.
I want you to keep going, but it's a dumb dichotomy.
It's a question for you guys.
Yep.
How are they pro-life?
Well, it's just we keep limiting everything to these categories that fully don't hold all that there is for a human's beliefs and who they are. And we keep trying to cram people into categories.
All right, so
we label so we don't have to get to know.
Yeah, but distill that down specifically. How is somebody who is pro-choice from a field of value, how are they also pro-life?
Well, many of them will also be against the death penalty.
Okay, they will be against the death penalty.
So they value life in another category or another
But in the topic of abortion, is there any way that they are pro-life if they are pro-choice.
By some
Well, now
fraction?
you're playing with the categories at that point, and I was kind of outside of them. So I want to clarify that a bit.
So what I'm saying is they are pro-life in the aspect of the life of the mother.
Yeah.
So that they believe that they have a choice over the life of the child, but not over the life of the mother?
Correct. So if you're pro-choice, you're saying, hey, I am choosing the life of the mother.
Of the mother, yeah. Yeah, that's a choice for life.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's still a choice for life.
Yes.
So the issue that I have right now with the whole Christian nationalist things is we have these categories like abortion.
That's what I was getting at. Yep.
Yeah.
There you go.
We have a category like abortion.
Yep.
And it's if you believe in that, then a Christian nationalist would say that we don't share any field of value on that.
And it's a lie.
Forget the Bible or whatever. Just field of value in general. And that's not true.
It's not
there
true.
There is an equal field of value in they both believe in life.
Yep.
One is leaning more towards the life of the mother.
Yep.
The other one is leaning more towards the life of the unborn child.
Yep.
Right? And I feel like from a faith
Why are they mutually exclusive, though? Why are they exclusive? Why would the life of the mother... I don't understand why they would be... There's a dichotomy between those two. What's the difference? I mean...
Well, there's
in other words,
are
you assuming that...
Instead of... Yeah, I want to keep
Are
unpacking
you
what you're
assuming
saying.
that in some birth course that the mother might die, then we're going to choose the mother over the child? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is even just somebody who wants an abortion, period.
Uh-huh.
That, let's say the pregnancy is totally valid, it's viable, and they're just like, I'm just not ready, and they have an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that person that supports that mother is pro-life because they're choosing the life to support the life that is alive, the woman over the baby.
Yeah, it's just that these categories, right, to where a pro-choice person's not anti-life. They have pro-life aspects, but not in the necessarily argument of where pro-life's commonly used, which is for the life of the unborn child.
Correct. And what I'm getting at is people who are pro-lifers in that scenario that I just gave would say, well, they're still
be pro-death penalty.
Yeah, they're still saying that they murder the unborn child.
Or pro-war,
right?
To where we just slaughter wholesale anyone who even remotely identifies with terrorism. Yeah. Let's just kill them all. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's inconsistent.
So where do we need to be from a believer's is that, okay, my field of value is that I am for life.
Amen.
I am for life in general.
Sure. Yep.
Now that gets complex.
It sure does. Yep.
And the complexity is that there's sticky situations that aren't always real clear.
Yeah.
Whether it is the death penalty.
Right.
Are we going to fire weapons of mass destruction?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we going to use chemical weapons?
Yeah.
Even all the way to the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
Are we going to allow torture to get information out? That's
a heavy burden to bear. You know what I mean? As a Christian, if you're a Christian national, now you've got a whole nother set of values to wrestle with.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. That's why I think there's no place for it. Because as believers, our belief is to love unconditionally. Go back to the new command I give.
Our country would be overrun. You know what I mean?
No, it doesn't mean no. It doesn't mean no rules, and it doesn't mean just absolute chaos.
Well, if you were a Christian and you believed in life in such a way that you wouldn't kill somebody, right? You wouldn't defend yourself against an attack on the nation from a country who doesn't have any problem with taking you over.
Well, this is where I want to.
I'm not saying that I wouldn't fight back. What I'm saying is by entrenching ourselves in these identity politics.
Yes.
Christian nationalists have to pick something.
Yes. Because they're playing the game as it's framed.
Yeah. You can't say no, I'm not taking a stand on that publicly because right now my call is for life, my call is for love. It doesn't mean we never stand up for anything.
No.
But when we align it to a dogma, now we don't have a choice. We've hitched our wagon to that, and it's like, this is what we've got to do. And so consequently, we can't sit down and have any dialogue,
right?
Because it's like, no, you're over there, and we decided a long time ago that we disagreed on that.
Well, see, that's the mistake I think Christian nationalism makes, is because it accepts the game board as laid out by someone other than God. So they play the categories, and what you see with Jesus every single time is he picks a third path. He always represents at least a third path. And
if the woman caught in adultery,
he's always a different path than the dumb dichotomy that's laid out to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so if anyone's serious about following Jesus, you got to discern dumb dichotomies and say there may be a higher path that pulls us together instead of fueling the divide. And if I get a second here, I just want to give one to where they come to Jesus because they're trying to pin him down in a very hot political topic. And they said, tribute, tax, should we pay that to Caesar or not? All right, so if Jesus says yes, he's pro-Roman, he loses his Hebrew audience. If he says no, then the Hebrews like it, but then they can get the Romans on him because you don't say one word about not paying tribute. What does Jesus say? Oh, anyone have a coin? Someone brings a coin. He said, oh, look, what's the inscription on there? They're like, Caesar? Caesar's face is on the coin. Jesus says, give back to Caesar what's his. So the implication is wherever you see image, give him his image back. But give back to God where God's image is, which is you.
Yeah.
Give coins to Caesar, but give you back to God.
Right.
That's what kind of answers that? And you know what? Everyone was just dumbfounded and just walked away because it didn't play on the chessboard.
Yeah.
That politics
Because they're
demanded.
like, well, shit, I guess I got to pay taxes now.
Yeah. But they're stunned with like, okay, while there is this tension where Jesus, in a sense, is saying, give him back his coin. So yeah, he's saying pay taxes.
Yeah.
But then he's looking at the Hebrew people, the Israelis who were the people of God. And he said, where are you being given back to? You're giving yourself to dumb dichotomies.
Yeah.
Instead of living out this deeper subversive kingdom reality that loves and serves and brings us together instead of pushing us apart.
Yeah.
I'm not going to play that game.
And so, Paul, let me ask you this question. When we've had conversations with Lance Ford, he gave us a little bit of a story about some pretty sensitive issues. And when it comes to Christian nationalism and the LGBTQ community, would you say that the divide that is there has been widened by the church in general, or because the church in general made such a strong stance against same-sex marriage, which is a political movement?
I think it's and in both because, not everybody's all into the government side of it and the laws and all of that kind of thing. And the more Christian, the influence in the Christian national direction, the more laws would be put in place. Doesn't mean people don't disobey it in practice if not legal. So, and then the rhetoric in the church, I think there's some hope there about how churches are posturing themselves. I think people fear, maybe I'm taking a long way to answer this, but I think people inside the church fear the whole, open and affirming kind of posture. We come in, we affirm what you're doing. They don't want to be in that posture, but yet they don't want to be haters. You know what I mean? So I think there's that narrative is under discussion, how to approach this in a life-giving way, not in a political, stand out on a corner and say, vote against, gay marriage.
Yeah.
That's not life-giving for people who are,
Yeah.
I just don't think, I don't think it's a good approach, and it would be a Christian nationalist kind of approach, right?
Yeah.
Make the law, and that's going to make the person, it's not going to change their heart.
The faith of Jesus persuades, but it does not impose. It does not force. That's what I'm saying. I mean, again, waving a sign, you have your right to do that, but like how much of that is is just forcing, right? It's this, your persuasion can become imposition, and
or it's cloistering. It's a fortress mentality,
we're
not going to be imposed upon. And this is part of our fortress is to scream this message to protect our community from, and you're not going to protect it because,
the best thing that would happen to us is just endeavor to get to know the people who represent ideas that you don't agree with. Get to know them. Try to build a relationship with people who vote different than you, look different than you, marry different than you, have a different sexual orientation, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's hard. And let me just say that's hard for human beings because we like sameness because we get safety from sameness.
Yeah.
But there's a bigger security when we step out of those sometimes lower definitions of security and dare to love, really love. It's going to require more of me.
It makes me think, when you say you had a girl crush, or what was it, on Boyd? What was it?
I have a man crush on Greg Boyd. Yeah,
like groupies. What do they call it?
Absolutely.
I
said I'd be fangirling if we got him on the podcast.
Yeah.
Greg Boyd still.
But what's cool about him, and not that you would agree with everything that he would say. We're all human, but I appreciate the wrestling with current culture.
Yeah.
That happens, marries theology to current culture, and the very teasing out some really difficult conversations about sexual orientations and the rights and wrongs of all of that. And these are politically charged and relationally charged and community charged issues right now. People just do not know what to do, how to posture themselves. And I certainly, hands down, there's no political answer for this.
No.
The political answer is not an answer.
The answer is for us to get in communities that are so tight-knit, so secure, and tight-knit meaning that you don't have to be the same, but you're secure, you belong. And the purpose of that group is, how do we as people continue growing into the kind of people who love well, who bring people together? And I think what happens is we grow just enough and we stop and we get caught up in the rat race of life and how the game board is set out that we think this is the only way. I have to have so much monopoly money for me to get something on Park Place and Boardwalk. You're just stuck in the game and we sleepwalk through life. But the kingdom has caused us that you can flip that whole game board over and live something that is just much more meaningful.
I mean, this also does when you start making the church an institution.
Yes.
Now what happens is your system begins to trump the relational aspects of what it takes for somebody to be loved in a community, right? Because, we can't have, people from that community come inside of the church. What if they want to serve with children? What if they teach our young people the wrong? And so, the system itself
becomes a new game board.
Kind of creates a game board that you have to honor.
This is how you play it.
That's how you play it. That's how you play it. But then you don't have those problems if you just walk across the street and meet somebody who's in that situation. Yeah. And look, how many of us in our community, if I'm going to make a list of everything that I know about everybody that's my friend and my dear friends, they're not all flawless.
Right. No.
Exactly. I mean, every one of us.
I'm not flawless.
Right. Every one of us are meeting some challenges and our close friends go, there he goes again. That's him.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And we love each other through it, challenge each other through it sometimes.
You're like, Cliff, drop the F-bomb again.
Oh,
yeah.
See what I mean? Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we're really sorry, everyone. Sorry, children.
Yeah. But, that's what I'm saying, though. It's like we're all together in this walk, and we love each other. Why can't we extend that just a little further, right, to say that all of us are living outside of God's whole perfect designs for us on some level?
If I can, let me pull this back just a little bit because we're going to run up against the clock.
What was our beginning topic here?
Let's run up against it.
Christian nationalism.
Oh, we're still on that.
All right, so multiple choice question. The United States of America was founded as a Christian nation, theist nation, deist nation, none of the above.
Good question.
What differentiate between deist and theist?
You want to take that?
Yeah, deism would be, and there were some of the founders that were deists, would be that God spins the top, it's spinning, and then steps away and is not interactively engaged in its affairs, but he will be the uncaused cause.
It's the clockwork.
So how would you take that away from, how would you compare that though to theist?
Well, he's involved. He is the same first cause, but he's involved.
Okay.
Yeah. So a deist would say that the universe is closed.
Yep.
And that God created the clockwork.
Step back, watch it work.
He's letting it go.
Yep. A theist would say the universe is open.
I got you.
Yep.
And that God is still has the ability.
Yep.
And wants to be involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I if I was going to answer that, I would say that there were people who were in the theist category who gave a nod to the culture that was dominantly Christian.
Yeah.
And were able to...
It's nuanced.
Were able to come alongside for the purpose of what they were building as a nation to go, I know that that's what they're saying, but for me that means this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I would say that it was more... I bet it was predominantly Christian, but that some of the operators were deists and theists who realize that's the dominant culture and we'll have to go with it.
But so you're talking about as a population?
Yes, and and even the population of the founders, right?
Okay, so what I'm asking is when they wrote out the Constitution, do you think they wanted that to flow into, like when somebody says we were founded as a Christian
I think they
nation.
found it necessary to give a nod to sovereign things.
Okay. So
all of them, I think, found it necessary to give a nod to that and believed in it.
Okay. Royce?
Because if you're a deist, you believe it, right? If you're a theist, you believe it.
Yeah, there's two totally different perspectives.
Yeah.
But you believe it.
But you believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say theism, but let me back up and say Christian nationalism, as it's sometimes we're founded as a Christian nation,
Not
in the way
sense.
that it's being asked for and pursued in some ways now, they came out of that in England.
Yeah.
They're not wanting to recreate that in a Protestant version.
Yeah.
But yes, almost 100%, not quite that much, but in the high 90% of anyone in this country at that time had a Christian leaning, right? Yeah. So they're honoring the constituency that's there. There is a heart for connecting to the providence of God as a first cause and interactive guiding light. And so there needs to be room for that. But there's no way the cats that got out of England under that religious state union, that was the whole point of them getting away from that, is not wanting to recreate it in
and I think there was some
version.
careful, they weren't stupid in their pen. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
They were.
But there's room for faith and there's room for cooperation and there is an honoring of a power guiding the light of America. So I do see that, but never to absolutely prefer Christianity above every single thing.
Well, see, that's what I was
else.
going to say is in the pen, it's careful to say God as opposed to Christ or
Jesus. Yeah.
Or Jesus.
The Constitution is not saying that, Jesus is, again, that was the predominant belief of the founders, meaning of the people who founded America.
Absolutely.
But they were careful in their pen.
Inarguably.
Yeah, because they could have easily written
we're in
Jesus.
agreement that this country was not founded as a Christian intense
this
nation.
is the only part of this podcast that's going to be lifted and promoted is that.
That's fine. We can,
here's the
promote
thing.
everything else.
I love where you're going.
The Christian nationalists will take that soundbite and put it on Fox News.
But let's make sure that we at least acknowledge this. Well, yeah, hopefully they'll listen to the whole thing.
Our purpose is not to just like set everything in concrete, Cliff. I mean, what we're trying to have here is a dialogue that is a reasonable dialogue.
Yeah.
To give a nod to, there's a reason for this tension. And in the language and the history of our nation, that's real, and it's not. Yeah. You can't be dogmatic about it.
And to his
Christian
point,
nationalism.
To his point, if they wanted to be told what to do, they would have never left
They
England.
had it.
Like that's what they were what they were fleeing from.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that scares me about the tone that I hear that comes out of Christian nationalists.
Exactly.
Is
they want that was in England.
Yeah, it's like it's the control that they want over that.
To return to a Christian nation,
yes,
is really an apparition. I mean, it wasn't a thing.
Because it was never meant to be that modality.
Yeah.
It's to influence it, engage it, help it make it better. And that was the one thing I was wanting to say with the founders. Hold that.
Yeah. I'll forget it.
The grand interrupter.
Yes.
All right. So here's the deal.
Hold on, wait.
The founders were not trying to establish a Christian nation, nor were they ignoring the wonderful influence of Christianity upon what is possible in government. That's a different point altogether. Not trying to make the government inherently thoroughly Christian as some kind of Christian structure, but to be influenced by all the good that it is. That's what Jesus means by the kingdom. It's at hand, it's available, it wants to influence and make everything better, but it in and of itself is a non-material reality. It's a heavenly reality, a spiritual reality that influences for good this physical stuff. But don't try to make it that, because that's not its primary nature.
Right.
It'll make it better, but don't keep trying to concretize it into something it's not.
Were we a Christian nation when the founders were here? Yes. In the populist sense. We were
Everyone was that. Yes.
So if we're going to go back to being a Christian nation, let's be Christians.
Let's see people follow.
Let's follow the kingdom. Let's take up the
It starts with you, Cliff.
The tenets of Jesus.
Let's
drop the language in our podcast.
Let's drop filthy language.
Let's just clean it up.
Okay, well.
Every word
if I drop my language.
Here we go. Yeah, but
everyone right now, stretch your hand towards our friend.
This is communion.
Praise be, brother. Praise be.
That's a little high proof for communion, brother.
No, that's perfect.
But
I've already told you that's
my point.
Marriage supper of the Lamb.
That's
my earlier point to our friends that have some flaws, that we all have flaws, and so
you got all fingers pointing at
me. we all have.
We
flaws.
Love you, brother.
We all have flaws.
No, but if we were going to return to being a Christian nation, it's an individual effort. It's a kingdom effort. It literally is a community effort among believers to be what they're supposed to be. And we don't have control over the entire population. We have control over ourselves. We have control over what we own as Christianity. We'll be those things. That influence can flow again. But to be a Christian nation isn't something you can mandate by the government.
Yeah. So to tie onto that, and we'll kind of wrap it up here, is whenever that's all being chanted by the politicians, as believers,
playing into fear,
we need to be that stinks. I'm out on that.
I'm out.
Do that living that you're talking about.
Yeah,
that's
and
awesome.
remember,
go vote.
Some of that is the worship of the ring, not the worship of the king.
Yeah.
Oh, son, that's
you take a text
that preacher
and a microphone.
came out in me, amen.
Yeah. You just gave a whole audience.
People watching this right now just fell out of their chairs like, my God, that was a thought.
I thought maybe there'd be like a choir that, like the curtain.
Hey, they were.
Hey, what if we could
hear
get
the music,
like some Muppets and have
just
them
pop up in those moments?
Yeah, I would like that. Okay, so let's name.
Bring it home, Cliff.
Let's name a misfit that was a believer, but would have rejected Christian nationalism.
Jesus.
I'm sorry, that's too easy. Too easy.
Every time.
Jesus is disqualified.
No.
I want to go first. Greg Boyd, who I just love. He's a modern. Read his book, The Myth of a Christian Nation, and its sequel, The Myth of a Christian Religion.
Okay.
If I can take another second, he perfectly lays out the kingdom of the sword, which would be earthly power structures that God does guide them, set them up. He uses them to protect people and even to punish evildoers. That is not his spiritual kingdom, which is in tension and meant to cooperate the kingdom of the cross, which loves and serves and cares excellent book. And I think his work as a theologian and philosopher has been profound in that.
Okay.
I jumped on it so quick, and you might not.
I'm still processing all those.
I want to
all the things I just said.
highlight
Yeah.
a guy because I just did that painting for Alton, Illinois. There's a guy that was the first abolitionist martyr in the United States. His name was Elijah Lovejoy. He was a journalist
Yeah.
in St. Louis, and he had a printing press, and he was getting a lot of flack for being an abolitionist. So he moved over to Illinois, which was more friendly to it. And in 1847, I believe it was, a mob came to address him on the front of his establishment. He came out to kind of quell the mob and got killed as an abolitionist martyr. So one of the first, there was a lot of that going on in England. There was a lot of voices, and then along came a lot of other players. But it's interesting that a believer who believed in the right and wrong of something outside of a government construct was willing to die for it. I think that's pretty cool.
Can I have a second one? William Wilberforce. Go.
What?
Because
We already mentioned Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
William who?
Wilberforce.
Wilberforce.
In English Parliament, he was a politician who wasn't trying to institute Christian nationalism, but he was giving his entire life to abolish slavery. He gave everything
What's
he
the movie?
had.
It's called.
Amazing Grace is
Is that what it's called?
Amazing Grace is a great modern version of his story. Amazing Grace. And
Is it a time period piece?
Yes,
It's literally about him.
And
I
it
think
has
I've
John Newton, the author,
Yes,
as his
yes.
pastor.
Right.
William Wilberforce.
Pretty good movie.
Yeah, it's phenomenal for what that tension of engaging an earthly kingdom power with spiritual heavenly
He
power.
did a John the Baptist kind of.
Yeah. And he gave everything to fight. And that moment of Wilberforce is what set it all in motion, even in the United States,
the
to push
abolitionist
back against
movement
slavery.
is really a social justice movement that deserves a lot of nods for the kingdom, because it was driven by church people and people that were, it was
There was no abolition, and I'm sorry, you can try to disagree or not like it, but the truth is that's there because of people who were representatives of a heavenly kingdom who said, that's not okay anymore.
Yeah.
And we need more of that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Who
And that
engage
did-
some of the ills of our day. Who's yours? I want to hear yours.
But that did lead to a government act, which was
It should.
Emancipation Proclamation.
It should
it took us
influence
another
it.
100 years to
Right.
really flesh it out as a nation.
But I want to
Still
it's a
working on
power under that's a groundswell of love and shifting of hearts that then is reflected in the law, not a top chair that we got to force in so they can just write that onto the will of people.
Good point. Your turn.
I'm going to say Barack Obama.
Awesome.
And the reason why I would say that is because there were some things that he did that obviously I don't agree with. There were some things that he did that I do agree with. But if you look back on his presidency and the attacks that he came under from the Christian right,
Yep.
all the way from what's your birthright,
Birthing, birther stuff.
your name sounds like it's Islamic.
Yep.
Just all kinds of horse shit that was being.
We're sorry, children.
Yeah, sorry, children. Just pray from my mouth.
I didn't know we were going to have to bleep this.
Stretch your hand towards Cliff, right?
Yeah, just right here. And that may have not been fabricated by the Christian nationalist movement, but it was embraced.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that we have to stay away from.
Yep.
Yeah, I wonder what happened to his faith. He was, what was the guy's name? Wright. It was something Wright.
Yeah.
That he was in Chicago.
I want to say is it Benjamin Wright or Jeremiah? Jeremiah Wright.
Yeah. Jeremiah Wright.
Yeah, they took that guy over the coals.
Right. But I wonder what happened to his faith and subsequently his family's faith because of all of that crazy that happened in his life. I wonder if he didn't back up a ways or if he pressed in to his inner faith. I would really love to have a conversation with Barack Obama. If you could have him on here, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Barack, if you're listening,
Barack. No, you're busy.
reach out.
Seriously, let's bring this all the way back around again to what was done against Barack Obama. Is the amount of fear that so-called people who should be predominated and governed by love. And the text tells us in John, 1 John, there is no fear in love. It's the thermometer of our heart. When you're driven by fear, your love is deficient.
So this is lampooning all of this, but I was talking to somebody who I said something about Michelle Obama, and the guy said, "You mean Michael?" I said, "What?"
Yeah, completely disrespectful.
No, he was saying she used to be a man.
Oh,
I mean, there's this whole thing on that.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like complete disrespect.
Yeah, just disrespect.
Well, yeah, I mean, he believed it.
I'm saying, but that's stupid.
We will not have the right perspective driven by fear.
Was this guy a believer?
Oh yeah,
yeah. See, that's the kind of stuff that I'm just like.
It's hard to fathom.
You can't. We just can't do that. Yeah. If you haven't read Obama's book Promised Land, he gets into a lot of those issues and talks about some faith stuff. It's good. All right, that's it for the Misfit Social podcast on Christian nationalism.
That's a good one.
Jesus for president.
Be a misfit.
Jesus for president. That's a book too, right?
It's a book. It's a book. Yeah.
All right,
read it.
Let's go. I'm gonna take this bourbon with me.
You'll need it.
You'll need it.
Let's go.